Hello, Skopje from the Netherlands, Hilversum to be precise. And I begin quickly with an apology because presumably some of you are thinking, who on earth chose Betty Blue as a philosophical film for our festival? And it's me, so you can blame me. But I'm going to give you both an introduction and I hope a stimulating defense as to why Jean-Jacques Benix's 1986 classic entry in the cinema du look genre, mini-genre of the 80s, is worth looking at and thinking about as philosophical. Now, yes, Betty Blue and other works by the same actor and others like Besson from that genre, Diva, of course, Rosalind and the Lions, they were not liked by the critics. The Cahiers people did not like these because they were not intellectual films. They were superficial. They were full of visual cliches, supposedly, and therefore not engaged in the politics of cinema or the art of cinema. But I still think they're worth thinking about, especially this one, Betty Blue, as philosophical films. Now, partly because as a philosopher interested in film, I'm interested in the question of what is philosophy and what is film. So, we get to those meta questions pretty quickly. What is philosophy? And as soon as you ask a philosopher that question, of course, you get one answer. Turn to the next philosopher, you'll get another answer. And you can only be assured of one thing, that any two philosophers are going to argue about what is philosophy. Is it wonder? Is it concept analysis? Is it fundamental or essential thinking? Is it the search for clarity or consolation or existential meaning? Is it wonder? Is it concept creation? Is it a force of thought? Is it power? Etc., etc. Philosophy is that one discipline that seems to perpetually be unsure of what it is. It continually adopts the metaphilosophical position of asking what is philosophy. Some would say that there is no such thing as metaphilosophy. All philosophy is metaphilosophy, and hence the latter term is redundant. But a film at a philosophical film festival like Betty Blue lets us think about these questions, because I'm saying Betty Blue can be deemed philosophical because its initial impression is of something which is superficial, lacking depth and lacking profundity, not asking the big questions, not a melodrama, not a documentary, not something we can, in a sense, think of in terms of an argument or a thesis or a proposition. But I would say then that the gesture of saying, nonetheless, that Betty Blue can be deemed a philosophical film inspires or invokes in us the question of, well, then what is philosophy anyway? We don't want to get into a kind of circular game of only choosing those films that reflect our definition of what is interesting philosophy, because we know already that it is a partisan choice. Every philosopher has a different definition of what philosophy is, really, if you get down to it. So they will have different ideas, perhaps, of what a philosophical film might be. Now, I'm not saying that Betty Blue is the only kind of philosophical film. Obviously, Ingmar Bergman is a philosophical filmmaker. Obviously, a film like The Matrix, etc., classic high-concept science fiction films can be looked at as appearance in reality films, questioning our questions of metaphysics and knowledge. Betty Blue doesn't do those things. But what if, nonetheless, in the face of that inability to recognize so easily Betty Blue as a philosophical film because it reflects our standard notions of what philosophy is, what if instead Betty Blue, because it's so extraordinary and non-standard, but nonetheless being taken as philosophical, alerts us to the openness of what philosophy might be? So, I began a book on film and philosophy years ago, mentioning Richard Curtis's film Love Actually as another kind of test case. Who on earth is going to want to talk about Love Actually in the same year when Michael Haneke has made a film? Obviously, Michael Haneke's films are philosophical. Well, if it's so obviously philosophical, why? if we can recognize philosophical texts and ideas in Hanukkah, like ideas from Emmanuel Levinas, then what is cinematically philosophical about Hanukkah? And I'm interested in film as philosophy, not film reduced to a text via dialogue and plot that is comparable with Levinas or Plato, but film as film, whatever that might mean, that cinematically generates its own philosophy. And I think Betty Blue does that, but not in terms of its narrative, that's for sure. Maybe not even in terms of its dialogue. It's a set of cliches. The story is a set of absolute cliches. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, and boy is happy again. That's one way of putting it, beginning, middle, and end, in that order. Boy meets a girl who is clearly mad or has mental health issues. He has a writer's block, and they have a great grand affair. She dies, of course, and that liberates his creative juices. So her death puts the man back on the typewriter, and all is well again. So yeah, okay, a set of cliches there in terms of narrative. But it is, on the other hand, and by the way, the depiction of madness within women for sure is dubious. On the other hand, there is a depiction of madness throughout the film. Everyone is somewhat mad, and being fou, being mad, is declared again and again about policemen, about institutions, not just Beatrice Dahl's character. But it is certainly, and it's interesting how it was described by the American film critic Roger Ebert as a skin flick, an Americanism for basically pornography. And there's a lot of skin on show. It is very, I would almost say, extreme. Before French extreme cinema came on the scene, it is extreme in its depiction in mid-80s for the sex and the sexual act and so on and so forth. But it is also very sensual. Skin and the life of skin, the skin of the film, is really important. It's not just human bodies. It is human bodies, but it's also male and female bodies. Jean-Uzo Anglade is as naked as Beatrice Dahl is throughout. They are beautiful, young, glistening bodies. Filmed in new ways. At the time, people were wondering about, oh my God, this is too extreme, etc., etc. But it was, by now, almost tame in its depiction of intimacy. But alongside those bodies, there are other bodies, and the bodies of objects, pianos, cars, Mercedes, Citroën DS, the CX, foods, making pizza, disgusting pizza and good pizza, tastes, tequila slammers, drinks, sensuality, of consumption of bodies, by bodies, of sounds as well, of course. Gabriel Yared's fantastic score. All of these are part of the skin of this film, I would say, to invoke the Laura Marx text. That makes it more than just a skin flick, to give that rather puritanical phrase another outing. And even then, the visuals, the composition, some people say, yes, it's very Sunday magazine supplement. It looks like a set of adverts for Benetton at times. But no, the Benetton ads, the visual luxuriousness that looks like adverts in Sunday magazines came after Betty Blue. Benex is good enough a cameraman and a filmmaker to actually create wonderful new visual images with color, with composition and blocking and so on, that then became cliches. And of course, those cliches are now at best kitsch, or just simply derided with time after whatever 34 or 5 years. But in time, I think might well be regarded as classic because they generated a set of visual cliches that came after that. Is it superficial? I think it is, in a sense, a superficial. There is a layer of the outside from that the opening scenes of sexuality, of chili con carne, and saving it, solve. The food is saved just in time, and the smells of it, almost the synesthetic smell of the chili in these opening scenes. The color blue, of course, in its Anglophone title, Betty Blue. And the type of blue there is so luxurious, from different, from clothing, from the sky, from paint. It's explored these matters and materials are explored beyond story. So it's not about the story. The story, in a sense, is a vehicle for this generation of what would become cliches in matter and colour and taste and sensuality. So it allows us to start to think about surface and depth, and whether, in fact, a film, using its inherent cinematic resources, which I'm not excluding text like dialogue and plot, that is part of the film. Film is a kind of Catholic art in that sense of all the other arts. But nonetheless, the non-textual elements, the visual elements of cinema here, I'm not calling it pure cinema, but nonetheless there is an intrinsic cinematicity here of colour and composition and sound and sensuality that is mixed up with cliches of sex and gender, of course, yes, for the time, whatever. But they make us think that perhaps this is a film, irrespective of the director's intentions. I'm not saying the author or the intention of the author was this, but the film itself is reflecting on its own surface. It's reflecting on superficiality. It's reflecting on and thinking through colour and taste and movement and performance even of bodies, for instance, in its own art, in a sense. So it is profoundly superficial in that way, but not in a hackneyed way, not in a commonplace way. It has become cliched subsequently, yes. At the time, it was groundbreaking. It did not speak to the intellectualists who are, often in the cahier, rather, I would say, too attached to the word, for instance, too attached to logos and to logic. And that just does not fit this film. So anyway, that's a defense of Betty Blue as the kind of a test case for what could count as a philosophical film, against all odds, perhaps. And I hope you enjoy it. And I hope to see you at some time in the future when we can all be together. Goodbye.